Welcome back to One on One with Mr. U. Of course, I'm your host, Mr. U. In studio with us, hypnotherapist, author, and advocate for childhood trauma, Graham Robinson, is in the house today. How are you, sir? Good to see you.
Yeah, great. G'day, Mr. U. Nice to be with you too. Looking forward to chatting with you.
Same here, same here. We had a fantastic conversation. There's a lot to get into.
Yeah.
I want to try to see if we can maximize the time we have together and to get into it. Before we do that, if you guys are watching our show for the very first time and you're interested in seeing more of our episodes from the past, upper right-hand corner of your screen is a QR code. You can grab that with your phone. It'll tap you into all the episodes, past and current, that we've done via this show and all of our other episodes of our other podcast brands as well. So thanks again for watching and listening. We are, of course, going to be live on Facebook and YouTube. And, of course, we will also bring you into Instagram sometime within the next 2 hours or so. So thanks again for watching and listening. If we appreciate you. All right, so Graham, we talked a lot about childhood trauma. Somewhat of a touchy subject for me personally because of what I've been through. But what I understood from you was that you left home and school at age 13. Share a little bit about your early life. Share a little bit about that and the experiences that kind of shaped you, man. Share about that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you mentioned it. They talk about maybe 90% of kids have had some form of childhood abuse, and quite often it's not always physical or even sexual, which is worse. It can be the emotional abuse is really tough, and absent fathers and so on. So mine sort of started when I was about 5, and I stole a couple of little toy helicopters from a shop, and I was playing. We were at a sea. My saw me playing with them in the car, so he pulls over near this forest, and he takes off his belt, and he starts whipping me, and that was the earliest moment that I remember the physical abuse. But the interesting thing is, and there were more of those events, and as I understood, as I started to learn about childhood trauma from my own childhood trauma, I began to understand what happened to him as well, and it seemed whenever I embarrassed him or made him feel like he wasn't in control, that's when he took his anger out on me.
Wow.
And that happened on many occasions. But when I did started to do the work on myself, I found that the therapist I was working with, she took me back to a time when, and this is what I mean about the emotional trauma can sometimes be far deeper and we don't know that it's happened. When I was a kid, about 5, 6, I won this I came third in this competition at school for drawing, and there was this big event in the hall to hand out the prizes, and all the other kids in front of me had their parents and family around them, and I was on my own. Nobody turned up, and I didn't even want to go up on stage to accept. I was just terrified, and there was no one there. And when we explored where my trauma really sat about my family, about my father, it was that incident that really buried deep inside me. And I thought, all the physical beatings were what caused most of my trauma, but it was this lack of love, the lack of care that I felt that I had from my parents. And that's what happens from others. If you don't have the love from your parents, as you may know, you start to feel shamed as a kid, and that shame builds into complete low self-worth. You don't think that you're worth anything, because if your parents don't love you, who the hell else is going to love you? As far as you're concerned, kid, it's black and white. When we say that as adults, we go, well, yeah, but as a child, remember, it's a very different thing. And so for me, my entire time in my parents' home was desperately trying to get his attention. And of course, as you can imagine, as a kid trying to get the attention of your adult father, you play up, you do bad things, you do anything to get the attention. That brought more beatings. So it was a vicious circle, and that made me feel even less loved. So much of my young life was spent outside of the house. I'd go and play in the fields. I grew up in the UK. We went to Africa. I lived there for a few years as a kid, and went back to England and then to Australia. And even I felt safer, believe it or not, in the African bush. Now, we were near a city, but I was still out in the bush, than I did at home, because everything I did or said at home caused this violent reaction, or at least that's how I saw it. And what happened was, when I got to around the age of 13, we'd moved to Australia, and we're living in a town called Darwin, which was at the very top end of Australia, small town in those days. And my education, I'd gone through about 10 schools, 10 different schools, and I was put in what they called then the difficult boys class, because I wasn't able to cope with the work. I just wasn't studying. And so I remember walking home, and in those days it was an end of year report card that you got about how you'd been, and mine was shocking. I mean, the only thing I did any good in was art. Everything else was D or D minus.
Oh my goodness.
And I'm walking home, and I've got this card, and I'm reading it, and I'm thinking that if I take this and give it to my parents, I'm going to get beaten. This is bad. And because they'd be embarrassed about, again, I didn't know it was embarrassment, but that's what it would have done. And so I threw it away. And when I threw it away, I knew that I could no longer live with them, because there was nothing I could do. And so we're talking 1970s. So there were a lot of jobs that I could pick up. So a friend said I could go and work in an auto electrician's and just do whatever. And so I simply walked away. I lived in a caravan, and nobody came after me. Nobody came looking for me. I heard later that, the school had sent people to my parents' house, but nothing else happened. I continued to work in Darwin for about 12, 14 months before I left and went to a larger city, went to Sydney. But, the interesting thing, and I don't know if it really related, but the person who offered me the job in the auto electricians, he would take me into the storeroom, and he would whip me with these metal rods, and he would do it. Yeah. And so it occurred to me, as I was trying to understand my childhood trauma later on, whether we, as kids that are abused, others who abuse kids, and I'm not talking just sexually, but physically or just in general, whether they can identify that in a kid. I mean, I don't know whether he just took advantage because he could, or whether he could see in me this sort of beaten down kid, and he could do anything he wanted with me. But, I only lasted 3 months, which was probably lucky for me. And I wasn't a very good auto electrician. The first time I did any work on lights on a truck, I blew the lights. So I wasn't particularly good at it. But I then just moved into working in a laundry in a hospital. And I never lived under my parents' roof again. And I never had a relationship with my father that was of any substance. And when he passed away, I was at the funeral, and my brother, who was also more emotionally disturbed by my father, but he was giving the eulogy, and I sat there listening to my brother, and I was completely empty and cold. I had and it feels terrible to say, but I had no emotion about him passing. I had no connection to him whatsoever. And I had nothing to give or want from him anymore. And so it was a very sad passing, and very sad to know that, that's how you felt. After I'd started to learn about my trauma, I found out that my father was given away when he was 2 years old. His mother died in childbirth, and he was given away to an aunt with his sister, and she was very, very strict, really, really strict on them. And he was given no love. We met family of his that we didn't know existed, and they said that he was just given no love. So some of the understanding of where this comes from, this pain in people, is from generations and generations where they haven't been given love. They don't know how to give love, and he didn't know how to share emotionally. He never put his arm around me. He never said he loved me. I remember actually one time, and it may not have been something that happens in the US, but in England, they used to put male hens, cocks, together in fighting rings and bet on them. And I remember I wouldn't have been more than 6 because we were just about to leave for Africa. He drove into this farmyard and there was this big shed in the field. And we walked in and there were all these men screaming at this pit that was in the middle of the field. And they were betting. And I remember he left me standing there watching these 2 cocks fighting. And I'm a 6-year-old boy. And he went off and he was betting. And then, you know, when it was all over, because they fight to the death, and it's, you know, it's pretty awful. He came back and we left, never said a word, never said anything. So it just, I don't think that he saw me as a child, his child. I don't think he saw me as anything. And so therefore, and others who have suffered the same absent father, it's the same thing. Their fathers, even though they live in the same house, are not there for them. And it just makes you feel that you're not wanted, that you don't belong, that you're not worthy. And that creates a whole range of other traumas like trust, and you're controlling as you grow up as an adult. And that's the big issue. It continues as an adult, doesn't stop when you turn 20. You have all these problems that you don't identify because you don't know you're traumatized as such. You know you've been beaten, yes, but you don't know what sort of trauma it's caused. And having simply, you know, my relationships, I would look for arguments with the women I was involved with because I forced them to leave me before they abandoned me. I was doing that on a regular basis, didn't know why. I had extreme jealousy for a while because I couldn't trust them. In my mind, they would always do something that you know, I needed to control. I had anger that I'd go from 1 to 10 instantly if something, even noise next door to me. I had this rage that I tried to control it. It was just really quite out of control at times. And all of these are elements of what happens because you're this little kid who wasn't loved and felt worthless. And therefore, these traumas build and grow and you carry them into your adult life. And that's the sort of work that, like you do, that I want to talk to adults about. You can't live with it and not do anything about it. You have to look at ways to heal, to do something.
Definitely. We got time for a couple more questions. I want to try to get some more in here while we can. Not having 2 parents in a household, I've been able to see the impact of that, not just in my own life, but even into my adulthood. Even because I have daughters and grandchildren and great grandchildren now, so I get a chance to see the impact of that played out, which is kind of strange to be in that seat. But also I see it in the lives of other people. Talk to me about what the father wound looks like, because I've heard the term before. I've heard it in different situations. In your case, you had a father in the household and there was still a wound to speak of. There are people who you may have met, who you may have counseled that didn't have fathers in the household. Maybe their mother wasn't in the household and they had a wound as a result of that lack of validation, that missing part of the connection. So talk to us really briefly about what the father wound actually means. Help us with that.
So it is, you pretty much said it. It is having a father in the house that is absent is as bad as having a completely absent father, and maybe even worse in some cases. So what it is an emotional wound where imagine you are desperately clawing up at, say, a cliff, trying to get to the top, which is you clawing, trying to get to your father, trying to have him say one kind word to you, have him show that he cares, and he doesn't. He is just not there. Now, I was taken care of, food, other things, clothing, house, all of that. None of that mattered to me. I wanted him to touch me, to feel good with me, touch me properly, put an arm around me, show that he cared. He never did. So the father wound is that deep trauma of not having your father love you. It's really love. The one thing when I talk to anybody and they talk about their children, it's give them love. That's what they want. That's what everybody wants. Just love them. I mean, sure, you need to provide food and all of those things, but you will do that if you love them. It's the love is the missing ingredient. And the father wound then leaves you, as I said before, feeling completely worthless. And as a child, we look at things black and white, certainly young kids. So if he doesn't love me, then no one will love me. I'm not lovable. That's the conclusion. And that creates that shame. And that toxic shame living in a family where you're not loved is what develops. And that's really, the father wound is really about their being absent and not even being there though, but not showing you the love. It just destroys a kid.
That makes sense. There's a sector of people. Now, I mean this, I'm trying to be really delicate when I say this. There's a sector of people who grew up, maybe they were mischievous, maybe they were not obedient to their parents, a lot of different things. Maybe they just wanted things that their parents couldn't give, so they took measures to try to manipulate situations. There are young people who have done that in life. Help me kind of put it together, because there's always some people use the word or the phrase childhood trauma, and they use that sometimes. Now, I'm not demeaning it. Sometimes they use it as leverage as adults. I went through this, so this is why I do these things that I do. I'd love to hear your expert opinion on what are at least one or two misconceptions about childhood trauma. If you can describe that briefly for me, just one or two misconceptions about childhood trauma. Go ahead.
One of the main misconceptions is that you didn't suffer childhood trauma because my father would smack me or whatever. A lot of people say, well, that wasn't childhood trauma. It's childhood abuse. So you will still have trauma from it. If you use childhood trauma as a reason to do certain things, and you say, like, be abusive to your partner, and so forth, I would actually argue that you probably do have childhood trauma, but you are using it as an excuse to do this work, which is inappropriate, which is wrong, to do this violence. I mean, a lot of kids who gather to gangs and who gather into large groups need that's because they need the love and the care. I mean, they wouldn't call it love, but they need the group around them as having somebody that they can relate to and feel good with, and so on. And that's their form of sharing their love. So for somebody, yes, people, and women will too. When I've spoken at events, women will come up to me and say that their husband or their partner is quite abusive towards them, and he says that he had people abusive to him, and that's why. And I said, well, that's not correct. That's not why he should be doing that. That's not the way. Yes, you can have anger, and you will have anger. So you've got to, if he's got genuine childhood abuse, he needs to do the work on it. And yes, people do use it as somewhat as an excuse, but I would argue that most people have had some form of childhood trauma. It can be moderate, can be mild, and kids are all different. They can deal with it differently. But yes, to argue that I'm doing this because I had childhood trauma, that's wrong. That's not the way it works. What you do is you are triggered because you don't know the trauma is triggering you. So, for me, give you one quick example, my parents screamed at each other all the time. That's how they communicated in the house. Mm-hmm. One of my traumas was noise. So when I hear loud neighbors or I hear sudden noise, I feel all clenched and anxious. Oh. And that's, I'm getting over that. I understand why it happens now, but it still does happen, even though I know why. And so that's what I mean about childhood trauma being genuine, is when a trigger happens and you don't know why, and you feel bad, and it does lead, and it can lead to violence. But to say I'm violent because I had childhood trauma is incorrect.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I want to come back to where the trauma shows up for you and people that you've seen that happen with. I want to question about something real quick. You mentioned about being physically abused by a parent. do you person, hope this is a too deep a question, but are you against what they call corporal punishment itself, or are you against the way it was kind of manifested in your household, or is there a difference? Talk to me about that real quick.
I'm against physically hitting children at any stage, in any school, in any time, because it doesn't help heal. Now, I mean, I know there'll be lots of people who will say, well, what else do you do? And I understand that a troubled teenager or a troubled child might be difficult to talk to, but you've got to find out where that trouble comes from in that child. We're not born troubled. We're not born wanting to hate. We're not born wanting to destroy. We're born as beautiful little unique babies, and we get changed as we grow up. And that change can start from day one. Like a parent can be, like my parents would have screamed at each other from the day I was born. So that trauma was already inside me from the start. I don't agree with striking a child or at any stage as a form of punishment. There have to be better ways to do that. And I know people, as I said, will say, well, there's nothing else I can do. And, but it will not resolve the issue. It'll just simply either bury it deeper, or the child will become sneakier or do things to avoid, or the child can also, as I said to you, I did things to get my father's attention, which ended up him hitting me. I did that because it was attention. I wanted his attention. I don't know if we've got time, but very quickly, when I was in a swimming pool, I dove in and I hit my head on the side and the water. And so I started to sink to the bottom, and I was dragged out by my brother and a couple of other people. And I was lying on, and this was on a ship. We were traveling to Africa. I was lying on the thing, and somebody said he should go to his cabin. So my father and mother took me to the cabin, and my father whipped me with a wet towel for nearly drowning. So he just didn't know that triggered in him the embarrassment of all these people seeing what I did, and that embarrassed him. That was his response. So you can imagine, as a child, you'll try to avoid doing these things, but it digs an even deeper hole in you emotionally that you're not cared about. So even smacking a child, if that happens, what has to happen afterwards is an explanation as to why. The parent has to go up and sit with them and say, look, I smacked you because you did this, you took that, you hurt your sister, you hurt your brother. I love you, but you can't do those things, and I won't do this all the time, or whatever. If you follow it up with something like that, then I believe you can, the trauma, it won't be a child who feels they're unloved and so on.
Yeah,
so,
that makes sense.
Yeah, if you're going to do that sort of thing, you then have to show the love. You can't then walk away and just hit them and put them in a bedroom and let them cry themselves to sleep. You have to go in and show them you love them.
Yeah, they won't feel the love then. That makes sense. Okay, so real quick, tell me some ways where you've seen the trauma show back up. I think you mentioned one thing from a personal experience, but who you talk to, clients that you connect with, where have you seen most commonly childhood trauma kind of show back up and resurface, if you will?
The biggest issues are, anger is one of the major ones.
Okay.
Triggering anger, but in trust, we don't trust anyone, so you don't trust your partners. The other area, which is it's interesting that you can have varying things happening all at the same time. So you can also be what's known as a people pleaser. So in other words, you will do anything to make people feel good about you. So you will do, you'll go to extremes to help them out. You'll make yourself available. You'll always be there. Even if you don't have the time or the energy, you do it because you don't want people to feel that you're not any good or be unhappy with you. One of the greatest challenges we face because of childhood trauma is that we feel alone, even when we're surrounded by friends or family. we actually, I remember standing in many parties feeling like I don't belong here. I feel alone. I said to my ex-wife when I left my marriage, I don't belong. I feel alone here. And I didn't know why. These are in times when I had no understanding of childhood trauma, hadn't even heard the term, to be quite honest. But it was true. I just felt completely alone. And that loneliness is what drives a lot of men to do some pretty ordinary things, and that in some cases, of course, take their own lives. So it is something that is probably the biggest problem that you may have from your childhood trauma. You're left with this feeling of not that nobody wants you, but that you don't belong in this world. You don't belong anywhere, that you feel alone. That is one of the most difficult areas to overcome, to reconcile.
Thank you for sharing that. I want to ask you a few more questions, but I want to try to get through them as quick as we can because we're just about out of time. I think these questions are valuable. I want you to hear, hopefully from our audience, and our audience hear from you. So, first question: how has your story transformed you and the work that you're doing today?
So, I was sitting on the lounge one day watching television, and I saw a father on TV put his arm around his son, and I broke down sobbing. I lay on the floor and I really cried my heart out, and I realized something was wrong. That's when the first awakening came. Once I started doing progression into doing some therapy, and I did what's known as EFT or tapping, which really helped. And then I went to a week retreat to do more work. I really started to dig into what was happening. And once I started to understand how bad my trauma was, then I started to also realize how bad it is for other people. And so when I started writing the books helped clarify some stuff and get some stuff out of me. But once I understood that I had this problem, I felt good when I was talking to other men to help them. So I figured that made me feel good. That's what I should do. And that's really the only reason I felt good about talking about it.
I love it. How do you want to be remembered?
That actually even made a difference to one person. If I can help one person overcome their trauma and lead a better life, like I am so much better now than I was 5-7 years ago. It's just a whole different thing. If I could do that and leave a legacy that my children are proud of, then that would make me very happy. And it doesn't have to be changing the world. You can do it as that whole thing about the pebble in a pond. It has rippling effect. You change one person, they can change someone else. And the work you do, you know what it's like. You change a person, and they might change somebody else, and so on. And that's all. I don't expect to have millions following me and so forth. It's a matter of just hoping that I can touch a few people and they make the change. Because it's a better life once you start out. You just have to understand you have childhood trauma and look at the ways you act to then realize I've got to do something about it.
I love that. Right on the screen for those that are watching today, Graham's website, we can learn more about his work and his mission, GrahamRobinsonWellness.com. GrahamRobinsonWellness.com. It's on the screen. It'll also be in the show notes if you can watch and you're listening to the show today. I'll leave it up while we ask this final question to you, Graham. If somebody listening has lived a experience that's kind of like yours and mine's, what would you want them to know? What would you say to them today?
It's not their fault. Don't blame yourself. There's nothing wrong with you. There was nothing wrong with you. You're still a beautiful soul, and you should also, I would implore you to do some work. There's lots of therapies out there. There's lots of churches to go to, and as yourself, pastors to talk to about this and get help. And do that. Don't put it off, because it gets worse. The older you get, the more of this comes out in you, the more the trauma leaks out. It's like a balloon that's slowly leaking, and it leaks more and more as you get older. And so you won't be able to avoid some of these things, and you will have a better life. You will be able to interact with your family and your friends in a very special way if you do some work. But remember, it wasn't your fault, and you're not to blame for what happened to you because others did it to you. You have to, but healing is your responsibility. It's nobody else's. You have to take charge of that. And so I would implore people to go and do that work wherever they go. There's heaps of people that they can see.
There is, absolutely, man. Childhood trauma advocate and author of Shattered Innocence, Graham Robinson's in the house. You can find his work on his website, GrahamRobinsonWellness.com. Graham, thanks for being here, brother. Fantastic
Mr.
episode.
Yu, thank you. It was wonderful.
Hey, man. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.
That's Graham. I'm Mr. Yu. This is One-on-One with Mr. Yu. Thanks again for watching and for listening. Have a great day.